Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tabor Talk. So, the people who have followed me for some time, know that I used to be a Joe Rogan fan. And in fact, I used to do a video, a critique of every single Joe Rogan show, right? And I used to always say, hey, I've watched every single Joe Rogan show, every minute of every podcast, and then I used to do a critique. Joe Rogan used to be good. He used to be good. He used to have writers on and scientists. He used to be he was very open minded. And again, he was never like a smart guy, but he had an interesting way about him. Very likable, nice guy, very kind. He used to be. And now he's like a MAGA guy. And he's a full blown, or maybe he is. He supported Trump. I maintain that he swung the election to Trump in 2024. He and obviously Charlie Kirk with the young people, but and Rogan too with the young people and Gen Xers, Boomers, whatever. Well, actually, what's the demographic? I think Rogan's demographic is 28 to 48. That's the biggie there. But anyway, Rogan's a piece of shit now. And he's a dumb fuck. And the sad thing about it is that he has tremendous influence. Although I know he's not number one anymore. I know that his ratings or whatever. I know it's hard to do to look at all the ratings with all these podcasts and YouTube and all that. But anyway, I got something for you. Christopher Hitchens, the great Christopher Hitchens. He died, I guess, about 10 years ago. But he was amazing. He was an atheist. He used to debate a lot of Christians and all that. But he did other things too, politics, whatever. But he was known as being this incredible debater, and he was just fantastic. And anyway, here's a thing called Christopher Hitchens Resurrected has something to say to Joe Rogan and the podcast and the harm it's doing.
In American cultural life, a peculiar phenomenon. The elevation of credulity to the status of philosophy, the celebration of being so open-minded that your brain falls out, the monetization of uncritical thinking on an industrial scale. No one embodies this more perfectly than Joseph James Rogan, a man who has somehow parlayed his inability to distinguish between an epidemiologist and a conspiracy theorist into a media empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Let us be precise about what we're dealing with here. A former television host who convinced people to eat animal testicles for money has now become, and I use this word with physical pain, one of the most influential voices in American discourse. This is a man who treats the question, "Have you ever tried DMT?" with the same theological weight that Aquinas brought to proofs of God's existence. A man who platforms cranks and scholars with equal enthusiasm, nodding along with the same slack-jawed wonder whether his guest is explaining evolutionary biology or insisting that ancient civilizations had advanced technology. The Rogan phenomenon would be merely ridiculous if it weren't so symptomatic of a broader cultural collapse. Here is someone who has made a fortune from performing ignorance, from not knowing things in public, from treating every opinion as equally valid, regardless of evidence, expertise, or elementary logic. "I'm just a comedian," he protests whenever challenged, before proceeding to offer medical advice to millions of listeners. "Don't listen to me, I'm an idiot," he says, knowing full well that millions do listen to him, that they take their pandemic guidance from a man who once made people drink donkey semen on network television. The podcast, that endless, formless 3-hour ramble through the swamps of American paranoia, has become the premier platform for laundering extremism into the mainstream. The formula is as simple as it is insidious. Invite on someone with views outside the mainstream, let them speak for hours without meaningful pushback, occasionally interject with, "Wow, that's crazy, man," and then claim you're just having a conversation. When criticized, retreat behind the shield of free speech and hearing all sides, as if every side of every issue deserved equal consideration regardless of evidence. Consider the actual content of these conversations. When Alex Jones appears to spin his elaborate conspiracies about global elites, theories that have inspired actual violence, Rogan treats him like a slightly eccentric uncle rather than someone whose lies destroyed the lives of Sandy Hook families. When Graham Hancock presents his evidence-free theories about lost civilizations, he receives far more airtime than actual archaeologists. When Jordan Peterson delivers multi-hour monologues about the decline of Western civilization and the chaos dragons of feminine psychology, Rogan sits in rapt attention as if listening to Marcus Aurelius, rather than a psychology professor having an extremely public breakdown. The COVID episode deserves special attention, not merely for its impact, though the impact was real, but for what it revealed about the Rogan method. Here was a man with no medical training, no scientific background, no expertise whatsoever, who spent months questioning vaccine safety while promoting alternative treatments. When he contracted COVID, he announced he'd taken everything but the kitchen sink, including ivermectin, prescribed by a doctor, yes, but then promoted to an audience primed for months to distrust conventional medicine. I'm not a doctor, but became the prelude to medical musings that certainly influenced public behavior during a pandemic. And when actual doctors tried to correct misinformation, they were dismissed as the establishment, as big pharma shills, as part of the problem. Because in Rogan's world, a YouTube video about natural immunity carries the same weight as peer-reviewed research. This isn't healthy skepticism. It's the democratization of ignorance, the flattening of expertise into just another opinion in the marketplace. The masculinity cult that Rogan has built deserves particular scrutiny. This is a 50-something millionaire who spends his time getting high, watching fights, and talking into a microphone, somehow positioning himself as the arbiter of what makes a real man. The obsession with testosterone levels, with hunting, with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, with all the cartoon signifiers of masculinity, it would be pitiable if it weren't so influential among young men desperate for identity in a changing world. The supplement grift alone should disqualify him from being taken seriously about health. Here's a man who raises questions about FDA-approved medications while peddling alpha brain pills and athletic greens, who applies suspicious scrutiny to vaccines while promoting whatever untested powder his sponsors are pushing this week. The same critical thinking he claims to apply to mainstream medicine somehow evaporates when it comes to the snake oil his friends are selling. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the Rogan phenomenon is the way it has normalized and monetized stupidity, the way it has made ignorance seem like wisdom, confusion like clarity. The constant, "I don't know, man, it's entirely possible," applied to the most absurd propositions. It's entirely possible that we didn't land on the moon. It's entirely possible that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. It's entirely possible that DMT lets you talk to machine elves from another dimension. Everything is entirely possible when you abandon any standard for evidence. The comedy excuse deserves particular contempt. Rogan hasn't been funny since news radio ended. His stand-up specials are exercises in yelling observations about cancel culture and political correctness, delivered with the sophistication of a drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. Yet whenever he faces criticism for platforming extremists or spreading misinformation, suddenly he's just a comedian, just making jokes. Can't you take a joke? It's the same defense used by every provocateur since time immemorial. I was just kidding. Why are you so sensitive? The free speech absolutism he preaches is, of course, highly selective. Rogan will defend his right to platform anyone in the name of free expression, but had Spotify remove episodes at his request when controversy arose. He'll defend the right of his guests to spread propaganda, but has his team issue copyright strikes against critics who use his content. Free speech for me, terms and conditions for thee. The influence he wields over young men, and it is predominantly young men, cannot be overstated. Millions who should be developing critical thinking skills are instead listening to a stoned millionaire pontificate about float tanks and elk meat. They're absorbing his casual dismissal of expertise, his elevation of anecdote over data, his confusion of contrarianism with wisdom. They're learning that the guy who does his own research on YouTube knows more than someone with a doctorate field. And who are the enemies in this worldview? The experts, the scientists, the doctors, the historians, the journalists, anyone who has actually studied something, anyone who brings peer-reviewed research to a feelings fight. In Rogan's world, your buddy who saw a documentary about ancient aliens deserves equal time with the archaeologist who spent 30 years excavating sites. More than equal time, actually, because the archaeologist is probably compromised by academic orthodoxy. The Spotify deal, $200 million for the exclusive right to stream this content, represents capitalism's complete surrender to engagement metrics over information quality. Here's a platform that could amplify any voice, any expertise in human history, and they chose to make their flagship the endless monologue of a man whose main qualification is that people will listen to him talk about anything, no matter how uninformed he might be on the subject. What Rogan has created isn't just a podcast, it's an ecosystem where bad ideas get rehabilitated, where discredited theories find new life, where "I'm just asking questions" becomes a shield against any responsibility for the answers those questions imply. He's the gateway to the rabbit hole, the friendly face who makes extremism seem reasonable, the guy who's just having conversations that happen to mainstream views that were previously confined to the fringes for good reason. The tragedy isn't that Joe Rogan exists. There have always been barstool philosophers who think they've figured out what they don't want you to know. The tragedy is that technology has amplified him, that algorithms have rewarded him, that millions of people have confused his performed neutrality with brave truth-telling. He's not speaking truth to power, he's speaking nonsense to the powerless and making them feel empowered for believing it. This is what the marketplace of ideas has produced. Not the best ideas rising to the top, but the most engaging, the most controversial, the most likely to keep people listening through the ad breaks. Rogan isn't a philosopher or a truth seeker or even a particularly interesting conversationalist. He's a content factory, a controversy generator, an industrial-scale producer of what Frankfurt called bullshit. Speech unconcerned with truth or falsehood, only with effect. And the effect has been measurable. A generation of young men who think doing your own research means watching YouTube videos, who believe every institution is suspect except the institution of some guy with a podcast, who have been taught that ignorance is just another form of wisdom and probably a more authentic one. Rogan didn't create this moment, but he's monetized it more successfully than anyone else. The question isn't whether Rogan is influential. His download numbers prove that beyond doubt. The question is whether American culture can recover from what he represents. The complete collapse of epistemological standards, the reduction of all knowledge to opinion, the transformation of ignorance from a problem to be solved into a perspective to be marketed. Based on his Spotify numbers, the prognosis is not encouraging.
That was great, wasn't it? Anyone not familiar with Christopher Hitchens? There were a ton of YouTube videos there in debates. He was the best. They call him the GOAT. Christopher Hitchens was something else. Okay, make sure you like and subscribe. It helps with the algorithm. Spread it around. You know you want to.